1952, Wilhelm Reich, the physician and scientist, first published his report on ways of modifying the weather using long metal tubes grounded through flexible metal cable into water. And the effect of doing this is to break up clouds, among other things. And Reich initially noted that, and he called his device the cloudbuster. I immediately ran out, garnered a friend who lived in Lakewood, New Jersey, and we built one of these and began to show that, indeed, this thing actually works. When you take these 10-foot long metal pipes, ground them into water, and point them at a cloud, the cloud will dissipate within a few minutes compared to other clouds of a similar size, which will remain intact. Over the next 20 to 30 years, I experimented a great deal with this device in many different kinds of weather and found that using controlled situations, that there was no question that the device could do as advertised. Furthermore, if one understood the dynamics of energy, as Reich understood it, in the atmosphere, and you understood normal or mainstream weather conditions, it was possible to create large rainstorms. This is a photograph of Reich with his, one of his original cloudbusters. That's him in the center. This device consists of about, the tubes are about 1.5 inches in diameter, and they extend from about 10 to 18 feet. And you can't see the grounding cables, but they're there, and it's grounded into a deep well. This is a graphic of how Reich understood that this worked. When you, apparent orgone energy, which he had discovered years before and had provided a lot of interesting biophysical confirmation of, seems to have an effect of concentrating and holding moisture, so that if you point, and it's also attracted to metal, as Reich discovered using other apparatus. So if you point such an apparatus like a cloudbuster at a cloud, the center of a cloud, the cloud will dissipate because, as Reich understood it, the energy moves to the pipes, and without the energy, the moisture will simply drop. Now, this is a way of destroying clouds. You can create clouds by pointing or making them grow by simply pointing the cloudbuster away from them. And this will relatively increase the potential of orgone energy at a place away from the place where you're pointing. And moisture will be attracted to these concentrations of energy, and the cloud will grow. In the northern hemisphere, the movement of weather is from west to east, so that if you point the cloudbuster to the east, what you'll be doing is setting up a stream of energy movement to your west. Clouds will form in the west, and in due time, they will pass overhead of the operator, and the moisture will drop as rain. And Reich was able to demonstrate this many times. As a matter of fact, became a bit famous when he saved the blueberry crop in Maine. And and other people who were interested in Reich's work were able to confirm this many, many, many times. So when we came to about 1983 or 1982, I received a message from an old friend, indeed a counselor of mine at camp, who had maintained some contact with me through his kids who were interested in my work. This was Dick Fox, who was a wealthy Philadelphia businessman, and Dick had made serious contributions to the state of Israel and was a member of the American Jewish Committee. And Dick asked me if I could help break the drought in Israel. Well, this had been a 6-year drought. with lowering water levels in the Sea of Galilee from year to year until it was in a dangerous situation. Sea of Galilee, for those of you who don't know it, is the main water source for all of agriculture aside from the rainfall in the winter. In the summer, there is no moisture as the whole weather patterns change. So they draw their moisture from the Sea of Galilee, and it's actually transformed and transported eventually by almost capillary-like tubes, which drop the moisture drop by drop onto the crop as it's needed. So I said, well, it's certainly worth a try. So Dick and I went over to Israel, and we reconnoitered and cleared the decks legally, and there was no problem with our doing this kind of work there, we found out. And it seemed like actually a good situation in which we could help, especially if we went there in the winter, because that's when the climate changes, and through the winter you can get up to 44 inches of rain. And although they hadn't had much rain for the previous 6 years, we thought that if we went in the winter, we would optimize our possibilities of helping. So this was not a controlled experiment, obviously. It was a field trial. So Kathleen Erickson and I went over the next year. That was January of '83. And what we hoped to do was to, if any weather was going to come through, we hoped that we could enhance it. If no weather was scheduled, we hoped to be able to create it. I have been able to do both of these things many, many times in the previous 10 to 20 years. So, let's see. I want to add one further thing. This is me with hair. With a cloudbuster we eventually built and we used in Pennsylvania, and it was brought to California when I moved to California. And it occasions me to remark on one other aspect of this work, one that Reich never described. When I was in the East, I worked with Bob John and Brenda Dunn, and came to understand the role of intention in creating physical reality. And while I was working with this particular cloudbuster in Inverness, California, there's a Tamales Bay there, and it's a marvelous spot to do this kind of work. I made an observation which really changed things about how this system worked. Typically, if it's a totally cloudless day and there's no breeze at all, and I've seen this many, many times when trying to create rain or disperse pollution, when that happens, as soon as you lift up the cloudbuster pipes, you begin to get a movement of air. It's unmistakable. And I had noticed this many, many times. Well, this particular device, as you can see, it's heavy, and it's powered, it's motor powered, and through a long cable, 60-foot long cable. Well, one day, as I was approaching the device with the idea in mind of what I was going to do, and the sky was completely still, not a whiff of a breeze, and I'm thinking about it, and before I even get to the cables, a breeze comes up. And I say, oh, this thing is working. Because I've known many times before that, breezes don't come up just like that when I'm working with it or in other conditions. So I remembered my work with Bob and Brenda, and I realized, well, intention is another factor that goes into this. And of course, that shouldn't be surprising, because we're working here with fundamental energetic situations. This is a beneath or a substrate for mass changes. And this is where I believe, at least, that intention, where the mind intersects physical reality. So I formulated that the cloudbuster and I and the atmosphere formed a functional unity, and that this is why one is able to get effects which are long-lasting, and why you can't simply put the thing up and expect it and go away and expect it to continue working. It will for a little bit, but then within a few hours it stops. So, there's another factor too, which Reich didn't know about or describe, and that was again something I learned from the work at PAIR, and that is that when two or more bonded people are working together on to displace an REG, that it will work better than otherwise. And Kathleen and I were bonded at the time, and we were working in great harmony in this operation. And I think that this had a great deal to do with the success that we eventually got. I should also mention that this concept of two people working together, two or more actually working together in harmony, was also mentioned by the educator and philosopher Roger Weir, and he called it in shared presence. And it's apparently a very ancient concept, which goes back thousands of years to the Chinese. So, moving on, we began our work in Haifa. Excuse me, 1 second. Just to give you some idea of what can be accomplished with this device in terms of weather making, here's a weather map, satellite map, from July 1977, 19th of July. And you can see there's the site of the cloudbuster station. This thing worked right here in Pennsylvania, and working with that large apparatus I showed you. And you can see the black globs are weather patterns and moisture and clouds to the west. So we start at 11:01, and by 2:31 on the 19th, you can see the shift in the weather patterns and the movement towards the site of the cloudbuster station. It's almost as if this stuff is streaming up towards here. And it continues through later in the day on the 19th, 4 in the afternoon, and it's obvious that we're about to be, at the cloudbuster site, we're about to be covered with rain. And that's exactly what happened. We got copious amounts of rain. Now, I should mention in this respect that one of the things that the cloudbuster does, as I've ascertained, is that when you point it directly up at zenith, it seems to entrain a intense vortical motion down to the earth. And when you get that, this is what's manifested on a physical level as low pressure systems, and you get all of the processes of weather formation, condensation of moisture, and so forth. So one of the main kinds of things that we do in operating this device to make rain is to draw from the zenith. Reich called it a draw because he felt that he was drawing energy into the system. So we began in Haifa, which is in northern Israel. Are we getting anything? Yeah. Up here. And as you see, and as I'll mention a bit later, we tracked our way south along the coast and then cut over to the Dead Sea and then south to Eilat at the southern tip of Israel. We started out on the 12th of January, completely cloudless day. The forecast was for clear to partly cloudy for 48 hours. Forecasting systems weren't nearly as good then as they are now. And of course, nobody was making a forecast for changes on a long-term, like 6-month or yearly basis. And we drew for 1 hour from zenith, and the intention was to enhance the possibly anticipated rainfall by creating this vortical action from the atmosphere to the earth. And we worked for about an hour, a little bit longer, and there was no immediately observable change. We also drew from the east in order to create an increase in energy charge to the west over the Mediterranean Sea. and we were grounded into the Mediterranean Sea at the time. The next morning, we got up, the sky was hazy with high winds coming from the east, which was consistent with the energetic buildup to the west. Forecasts were changing. There was a possibility of rain in central and southern Israel later in the day. Within 10 minutes of beginning our operations, discrete clouds began to form out of this hazy sky, directly in relation to the direction we were pointing the cloudbuster. By the end of an hour of the operation, the sky was almost completely overcast, and when we drove away from the site, it began to rain. This was unexpected and unforecast. The next day we got up, it was raining heavily, with a forecast for rain over the entire country. We worked in a break in the rain for about a half an hour in the afternoon with the intention of increasing the duration of the rainfall. The result of this was continuous rain for the next 5 days, with 9 feet of snow falling on Mount Hermon and 4 inches of rain into the Sea of Galilee. Weather maps show development of a low pressure system developing off the coast, but it was unrelated to previous atmospheric patterns. And a series of cold fronts formed, which racked Israel with precipitation on the following several days. We moved down, feeling we could do no more there, so we moved down to Ascalon, and we operated again there, and this was the only time that we were ever surprised by the Army. Here we are dragging along with a look, which an apparatus looked like a howitzer by a truck, and we're out in the middle by the sea, and all of a sudden these commandos pop up all around us. What are we doing? Well, I had a cover story, which was we were measuring, changes in ionization in the atmosphere, and it was convincing enough for them, and so they let us go on. So we worked in Ascalon for about 3 days, and the forecast was rain on the 22nd. That was the last day of our work there. And again, we worked to augment rain, and on the 22nd, it rained, and it eventually covered most of the country with flooding in the Negev and snow in the northern mountains. And we tracked our way down to Eilat, down in here, and it practically never rains there. They get 2 inches of rain a year, and we set the cloudbuster up and it started to sprinkle. So we felt that we were successful and there was a little more that we could do at that time. So we called Bernie, our contact with the American Jewish Committee, and said, well, we're ready to go into phase 2, which was to train a student and set up a permanent base so they could use this year after year if they needed to. And Bernie just screamed at me and he said, you did that? And I said, yes, Bernie, that was our plan, and we did do that. We did create this rain. He says, well, I have to think about it now, although he had agreed previously that we were going to follow through with phase 2. So he wanted me to come up and Kathleen and I to track up to Jerusalem and work with his assistant, Yaakov Panini. Yaakov is an old-timer, a 6-day war veteran, and worked with the agricultural service. So this was really one of the most startling times of experiences I've ever had with this, because Yaakov knew everybody in Bethlehem, and he took us to places nobody else could get in. He was also a guide, and everybody, all the Arabs knew him. But we were set up with a cloudbuster in a place where the tubes were grounded into an aqueduct which ran into King Solomon's pools. Well, this is starting to blow my mind, because here I am, in the 20th century, and I've got this future space age device which I'm operating, and it's grounded into something which is 2,000 years old. You can understand the possible mental disconnect, all these kinds of things going on. Nevertheless, it was a cool day, and I told Yaakov, you point to a cloud and we'll break it up. So he points to a cloud, and much to all of our astonishment, holes formed in the cloud in the exact position that the pipes were mounted on this rack. And Yakov said, I don't believe it, but I see it. I want it. He wanted it for the Agricultural Service. We couldn't give it to him because it wasn't my nickel. That was up to Dick Fox. And the thing finally got lost in the Israeli bureaucracy. But we felt we'd been successful.
Fascinating stuff. There's time for questions. Anybody have a question? Please come up here.
Yes, Dick, one question I have regarding this is the water you're drawing for the rain is presumably coming from other areas, and other areas would likely be dry or not get the rain as a result of your actions then?
The water that we're drawing,
Like, I mean, the rain would presumably fall elsewhere if you hadn't,
there was no rain. What you're saying implies that rain would have been there, but there was no rain.
or so do you think there would not have been any rain elsewhere had you not done what you did?
I think there wouldn't have been any rain over Israel, at least.
So, but I mean, say in the U.S., for example.
I have no idea about that.
Okay.
When we work here, which we've done many times on the West Coast, we try to track these things across the country to see what is happening downstream, so to speak. And we do have some idea about that. But when I was there, I had no access to adequate information.
Okay, thanks.
Right. York, why am I so surprised to see you at the microphone?
It seems fairly safe to say that you won't find anything on the NOAA website about orgone energy modifications to the weather, nor on, I haven't checked this, but I doubt that things like cloud seeding and other forms of weather intervention will discuss it either. If the effect is as obvious, as replicable, as reliable as you have been describing, do you see any obstacle to trying to get together a large-scale team for a demonstration project and get this into the cognizance of the world and the scientific community once and for all?
There's no resistance on my part. But I'll read this. You'll all recognize this. This is a letter. We submitted this information to the eventually got to the Israeli Oceanographic and Limnological Research Department. Dear Mr. Fox, Yohei Ben Nun passed on to me your letter of March 14th. I've read the papers you sent concerning the ergonomic weather control. The results are interesting and puzzling. However, I think that the most urgent work which has to be done presently is a thorough and systematic research of the phenomena in order to understand it. The operation and practical results are secondary, mainly because it seems unreasonable to use a possibly powerful tool without knowing what we are doing. It wasn't secondary to the farmers who got the water out of the Sea of Galilee following our work. Such a research work should be carried out by a group of scientists, including various disciplines, under the guidance of a physicist having an interdisciplinary background in physical sciences. I will recommend you, York. This is far beyond the capabilities of IOLR. IOLR could be involved in further stages, but could not initiate it. I am personally interested in any progress. I'm sure most of you have got similar kinds of letters in your own kind of work, and it's the nature of the bureaucratic beast.
We've just got 30 seconds left, but a quick question. What you've shown this time that I hadn't seen before was the effect of intention. And how do you know that this isn't entirely an effect of intention, where the cloudbuster is simply a vehicle for that intention?
Well, I did some experiments. It is known long before this work that by simply looking at a cloud, you can destroy it, if that's your intention. So I tried that, and yes, I could do that. but nowhere near the rapidity and intensity that it happens when you are co-functioning with something like a cloudbuster.
Thank you. Thank you for an interesting talk.
Okay.